The mist in Lost Creek Hollow didn't so much roll in as it climbed. It crept up from the damp earth, snagging on the bare, skeletal fingers of chestnut and oak, choking the valley in a perpetual damp twilight. The year was 1843, but in this cleft of the Appalachian Mountains, time was measured not by calendars, but by planting seasons, by the turning of the frost, and by the sermons of Pastor Elijah Thorne. Lost Creek Hollow was a prison of topography. The mountains, ancient and gray, leaned in on themselves, sealing the 24 families within from the rumors of the flatlands. Talk of new presidents, of railroads, of a world moving faster than a mule-drawn plow. Here, the world was the creek, the cabin, the corn patch, and the chapel. The chapel was not a white-steepled place of gentle worship. It was built of rough-hewn poplar logs, chinked with mud and rock, and it sat at the head of the holler against a sheer cliff face known as the Bleeding Rock. After a hard rain, iron deposits in the granite would streak the stone with dark, unsettling red, as if the mountain itself wept. This was the chapel of the Bleeding Rock, and Pastor Elijah Thorne was its voice, its law, and its fire. Elijah was a man carved from the same hard granite as the cliffs. He was tall, gaunt, with a beard the color of iron rust and eyes that burned with a high, feverish light. He didn't just read the good book, he wrestled with it, he shouted it down. He emerged from his cabin after days of fasting with interpretations that shook the souls of his congregation. They were a flock cut off from organized religion, reliant on this one man for their spiritual bread, and he fed them a diet of brimstone, judgment, and fear. His voice was a thing of legend. It was said he could holler a prayer from his pulpit and be heard by the Sullivans clear on the opposite ridge, that his whisper of damnation could chill the blood faster than a January frost. He preached a hard gospel for a hard people, a people who saw the hand of the Almighty in a blighted potato crop and the devil's work in a stillborn calf. And then there was Seraphina. Seraphina Thorne was 17, pale as the mountain laurel that bloomed in the high shade. She was the pastor's only child, the lily of the holler, a creature of silent grace and profound, terrifying obedience. Her mother, Martha, had been a quiet, worn-down woman who faded from life the previous winter, taken by a cough that settled in her lungs and never left. Since Martha's passing, Seraphina had become the sole keeper of the pastor's cabin, moving like a ghost through the dim rooms, her life measured in chores and prayer. The folk of the holler watched her with a mixture of pity and awe. She was beautiful, but it was a fragile, untouched beauty, like a perfect spiderweb glistening in the dawn, a thing that the hard life of the mountains had somehow not yet torn apart. She never spoke unless spoken to, and when she did, her voice was soft, hesitant, always ending with, "Sir," or "If it pleases Pappy." She was her father's shadow, his creation. But as the winter of 1843 began to thaw, as the mist thickened and the nights grew heavy with the smell of damp earth, the folk began to notice a change. The pastor's gaze lingered on his daughter. It was not the simple gaze of a father. It was the look of a man studying a text, of a zealot finding a new, disturbing revelation in familiar scripture. The air in the chapel of the Bleeding Rock was growing heavy, not just with the promise of salvation, but with the scent of something deeply, terribly wrong. The memory of Martha Thorne was as thin as the mist. She had died in the deep cold, when the creek was frozen solid and the wind, which the old folks called the holler haint, screamed down from the high peaks. It was a wasting sickness, the mountain term for any illness that hollowed a person out from the inside. Widow Maeve, a woman who lived on the edge of the settlement and practiced the granny magic of the old country, herbs, poultices, and signs, had offered her remedies. She had come to the pastor's cabin with a bundle of dried lungwort and a poultice of mullein. "This'll ease her breathing, Pastor," Maeve had said, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "The mountain gives us what we need, if we know where to look." Elijah Thorne had stood in the doorway, blocking the light. His face was a mask of cold piety. "Get ye behind me, woman," he had boomed, his voice rattling the loose glass in the window. "I will not have heathen simples in this house. My Martha's affliction is a test from the Lord. It will be lifted by prayer, or it will be His will." He had shut the door on the lungwort and the widow. He had prayed. He prayed loudly, For hours, his voice rising and falling in the cabin while Martha coughed her life into a stained rag. Serafina, then 16, knelt beside him, her knuckles white as she gripped her hands, her young voice joining his until she was hoarse. When Martha finally passed, in the blue-black cold before dawn, Elijah did not weep. He lifted his hands to the ceiling and declared, "The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Serafina had wept, but silently, her thin shoulders shaking as she pulled the quilt up over her mother's face. The men of the holler, Silas Croft, Old Man Sullivan, and the Pearsall boys, dug the grave in the frozen ground behind the chapel. It took them 2 days, the picks striking sparks from the rock-hard clay. The funeral was short. Pastor Thorne preached not of Martha's kindness nor her hard work, but of the certainty of judgment and the need for the living to prepare their souls. Now, months later, Martha's chair sat empty by the cold hearth. But it was not empty for long. After the ground thawed and the first dogwoods bloomed, Pastor Thorne moved the chair. He placed it at the head of the table opposite his own, and he bade Serafina sit in it. "You are the woman of this house now, Serafina," he said, his voice softer than usual, but no less firm. "It is a heavy burden, placed on you by the Almighty. You must fill your mother's place in all things." Serafina, obedient, slipped into the worn wooden seat. It was too large for her. Her feet barely touched the floor. She looked small, a child playing dress-up in a life that was about to become a waking nightmare. The congregation, visiting for Sunday supper, exchanged uneasy glances. Old Man Sullivan cleared his throat, but said nothing. To question the pastor was to question God's anointed, and no man in Lost Creek Hollow had the spine for that. Silas Croft, the oldest elder, a man whose beard was white as snow, nodded slowly. "A woman's place is to serve," he murmured, quoting a scripture Elijah himself had drilled into them. "It is good she learns young." But Widow Maeve, watching from her distant cabin, saw the smoke rise from the pastor's chimney and felt a cold dread. She saw Serafina moving in her mother's apron, sitting in her mother's chair, and she knew. This was not about chores. This was about possession. For 3 days, Elijah Thorne did not emerge from his cabin. The holler held its breath. They were used to the pastor's wilderness spells, times when he would lock himself away with only the good book and a jug of water, wrestling with demons or angels. They were never sure which. When he emerged on the 4th day, he was changed. His eyes, usually burning, were now wide and glassy, fixed on some point beyond the mountains. He looked, as Silas Croft later whispered, like a man who done stared clean through the veil and seen the gears of creation. He did not speak to anyone. He walked directly to the chapel, ignoring the Sullivans mending a fence and the Pearsall boys skinning a buck. He pulled the thick rope, and the chapel bell began to toll. It was not the joyous peal of a Sunday morning, nor the slow, mournful knell of a death. It was frantic, urgent, a sound of alarm that echoed off the granite cliffs. "The bell! He's ringing the warning bell!" Families dropped their tools, their washing, their plows. The warning bell meant one of 2 things: a wildfire sweeping the ridge, or a sign from God. Within the hour, every soul in Lost Creek Hollow was packed into the cold, damp chapel. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, wet wool, and fear. Pastor Thorne stood at the pulpit, which was carved from a single massive stump. He was trembling, not with weakness, but with a terrible, contained energy. Serafina sat in the front pew, directly below him, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Children of Lost Creek," Elijah began, his voice a low thunder. He waited until every cough, every shuffling foot was silent. "I have been in the furnace of the Lord. I have been in the wilderness, and he has spoken to me. He has shown me the heart of this holler, and it is tainted." A collective gasp. Tainted. They were good folk. They kept the Sabbath. They feared God. "The world outside," he roared, slamming his fist on the great book, "is awash in sin. It is Sodom. It is Gomorrah. The cities of the flatlands are cancers, and their sickness spreads on the wind. But we few, were set aside. We were chosen. But the serpent has found our garden." He paced, his boots echoing on the rough floorboards. "Our blood," he hissed, leaning over the pulpit, his eyes sweeping the crowd, "is thinning. Our faith is weak. We have mingled with the outside. We have taken wives from downriver. We have traded with the godless. The Lord sees this, and he is displeased. He sees the weakness in our seed. Old man Sullivan shifted. His wife was from 2 counties over. "He has shown me a vision," Elijah cried out, his arms raised. A fire is coming, not of wood, but of the Spirit, a cleansing fire that will burn away the dross, and only the pure seed, the original seed, will survive to build the new Zion in this very holler. He paused, his chest heaving. The silence was absolute. The Lord has commanded a sacrifice. He has commanded a purification. The way of Abraham, who was willing to offer his own. The way of Lot, who was spared from the fire to carry the only seed left in a burned world. He was quoting Genesis now, but twisting it, his voice wrapping around the words until they sounded new and terrifying. The congregation was mesmerized, caught in the snare of his charisma and their own deep-seated fears. To purify the bloodline, Elijah continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, the first blood must be the holiest. The blood of the shepherd must be kept pure, unbroken. He has commanded me to seal the covenant, to bind the first daughter of the holler to the holiest vessel. He stared down. The congregation, as one, followed his gaze. He was looking directly at Seraphina. She was trembling, her head bowed, her pale hair falling to hide her face. "The Lord," Pastor Thorne declared, his voice ringing with the force of terrible, joyful conviction, "has commanded me to take my daughter, Seraphina, as my wife, to raise up a pure seed for the new Zion. It is the forbidden gospel, forbidden to the sinners of the flatlands, but given as a divine gift to us, his chosen." The words hung in the air, thick and poisoned. Silas Croft's jaw dropped. One of the Pearsall women made a small, choking sound. Seraphina did not move. She did not look up. She just sat, a pale lily on the front pew, as her father, the voice of God in their valley, pronounced her doom. The holler was paralyzed. Elijah's proclamation had shattered the rhythm of their lives. It was a stone dropped into a still, dark pond, and the ripples were ones of profound, unspoken horror. Yet no one spoke against it. To defy the pastor was to defy the God who sent the rain, the God who blighted the corn, the God who held the keys to heaven and hell. They were simple people, and their fear of damnation was more potent than their grasp of earthly law. They returned to their cabins, silent. The men chopped wood with a frantic, angry energy. The women scrubbed floors that were already clean, their knuckles raw, their eyes averted from their own husbands. They were all complicit in the silence. In the pastor's cabin, a different, quieter horror was unfolding. Elijah, buoyed by the ecstasy of his revelation, set about preparing Seraphina for her new role. He treated it not as a transgression, but as a sacred duty, the most holy of callings. "You have been chosen, daughter," he said, sitting across from her at the hearth. The firelight cast strange, leaping shadows on his gaunt face. "Of all the women in this holler, the Lord has found you worthy. You are to be the mother of the new Zion. You are Esther. You are Mary." Seraphina sat on a low stool, her hands twisting in the lap of her coarse wool dress. "Pappy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It ain't right. The good book. Mammy." "The good book is a lock," Elijah said, his voice gentle, patient, as one might speak to a foolish child. "And the Lord has given me the key. The flatland preachers, they read the words, but they don't see the meaning. They are blinded by the world. We are not of the world, Seraphina. We are of the mountain. We are of the Lord." He began his twisted education. He pulled the heavy, leather-bound Bible into his lap. He skipped Leviticus, the book of clear prohibitions, dismissing it as law for the weak, not for the chosen. Instead, he turned to Genesis. "Look here," he commanded, his finger tracing the verse. "Lot, a righteous man, the only righteous man. When Sodom burned, who did God save? Him and his daughters, and the world had to be remade. Do you see, child? The Lord provides a way. Theirs was the only seed left." He turned the pages, his hands moving with certainty. and the Song of Solomon. A garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse. A spring shut up, a fountain sealed. Do you not see the beauty of it, Seraphina? Sister, spouse, the Lord has made our bond perfect. You are my blood, and you will be my covenant. He spoke for hours. He warped scripture, pulled single verses from their context, and wove them into a terrifying tapestry, a forbidden gospel, where God demanded the unthinkable as the ultimate test of faith. Seraphina listened. She had no defense. Her mind, cultivated only by her father's teachings, had no walls to keep him out. He had built her world, and now he was rearranging the furniture. Doubt was the devil. Disobedience was damnation. Her mother was gone. She was alone with this burning-eyed man and his terrible holy words. He made her kneel. He laid his hands on her head and prayed, his voice booming in the small cabin, calling on God to make this vessel ready, to bless this holy union, to strike down any who would question this new covenant. When he was done, he lifted her to her feet. Your mother's wedding dress is in the chest. You will mend it. It will be your holy garment. Seraphina's last defense crumbled. The thought of her mother's dress, the simple muslin dress Martha had worn, being used for this, it broke something inside her. She didn't cry. The capacity for tears seemed to have frozen. She just nodded, a slow, mechanical movement of her head. Yes, Pappy, she whispered, as the Lord wills. The wedding was not a wedding. Elijah Thorne, in his divine arrogance, deemed the word too common, too worldly for what he was doing. He called it the consecration of the covenant. It was to take place on Sunday at the foot of the Bleeding Rock itself, not inside the chapel, but outside, under the judgment of the open sky. The day arrived with a low, bruised purple sky. The air was heavy, humid, promising a storm that refused to break. The entire holler gathered. They came not to celebrate, but to bear witness, their faces grim, their Sunday clothes hanging limply on their frames. They looked like folk assembled for a hanging. Widow Maeve watched from a high ridge, hidden by a stand of sourwood. She would not set foot near the chapel, not today. She held a small carved piece of rowan wood in her hand, rubbing it with her thumb, a useless charm against a madness this deep. Silas Croft, as the eldest, stood near the front, his face a knot of confusion and fear. He was a man who cleaved to tradition, and this was the shattering of all tradition. Yet the pastor's power held him fast. Then Elijah emerged from his cabin. He was not in his usual black preaching coat. He wore a simple, undyed linen shirt, like a penitent. He looked ecstatic, his eyes fixed on the red-streaked cliff face as if he could see the angels of heaven descending. A moment later, Seraphina appeared. She was a ghost. She wore her mother's wedding dress. The muslin was yellowed with age, and she was so thin that the dress hung on her, pooled at her feet. Her pale hair was unbound, flowing down her back. Her face was chalk-white, her eyes wide and vacant, staring at nothing. She looked like a sacrificial lamb, scrubbed clean and led to the stone. She walked barefoot, her steps slow, mechanical. She did not look at the congregation. She did not look at the mountains. She walked directly to her father, who waited for her by the cliff. Elijah took her hand. It was small and cold in his. He turned, not to the people, but to the bleeding rock. "Almighty God," he roared, his voice echoing off the stone. "You who tested Abraham, you who saved Lot, you who see the taint in the hearts of men, you have commanded this. You have demanded a pure vessel for a pure seed." He raised Seraphina's hand high. "Behold the daughter of Zion. Behold the mother of the new world. The flatlanders will burn. Their laws are dust. But here, in this high place, we will keep the covenant." The congregation shuffled. A baby began to cry, and its mother quickly muffled the sound against her breast. "Seraphina Thorne," Elijah said, turning to her. His voice was no longer booming. It was intimate, possessive. "Do you come to this holy covenant of your own will, obedient to the Lord God who commands us?" Seraphina's gaze was fixed on the rock. A single tear traced a line through the dust on her cheek. She did not seem to be breathing. A long second passed. "Speak, child." Elijah commanded, his grip tightening. I do, she whispered, the words stolen by the wind. And do you accept me, Elijah Thorne, your father, as your spiritual spouse, to cleave to me, to bear the holy seed, and to build the new Zion as the Lord has commanded? She flinched, a small bird-like motion. I accept. Then it is done, Elijah cried, triumphant. He did not kiss her. Instead, he raised both their hands to the sky. The covenant is sealed. The blood is purified. Let the fire come. Lost Creek is the Lord's. He turned her to face the congregation. He smiled, a terrible, gap-toothed smile of pure, unwavering madness. Behold, he said, his voice soft, my wife. As he spoke, the bruised sky finally broke. The rain began to fall, not a cleansing rain, but a cold, hard drizzle that turned the red ore in the cliff face into rivulets of dark, fresh blood. The bleeding rock wept for them all. The rain lasted for a week. The holler was shrouded in a gray misery, the creek rising to a muddy, churning roar. The folk of Lost Creek stayed inside their cabins, the sound of the rain on their shake roofs a drumbeat of their own cowardice. The consecration had happened. The unthinkable was now the mundane. The pastor's cabin, set slightly higher than the others, became a place of profound dread. No one visited. Children, who once played tag in the chapel yard, were now forbidden from going anywhere near it. They were told the pastor was in Holy Communion. Inside, the silence was heavier than the rain. Serafina moved through the days in a fog. Her life, which had been one of simple, hard chores, was now a confusing hell. Elijah treated her with a strange, unnerving reverence. He called her Mother Serafina, or my spouse. He would read to her for hours from the Song of Solomon, his voice caressing the words, his eyes fixed on her. He had taken her. The act itself, happening in the dark of the cabin with the storm raging outside, was a violation so deep it left no mark on her skin, but shattered her soul. She had dissociated, her mind fleeing to a place high in the rafters, where she watched the small, trembling girl in her mother's nightgown endure the will of the Lord. Elijah, in his zealotry, saw no wrong. He saw only duty. He saw the fulfillment of prophecy. He was energized, alive with a holy purpose. He hummed hymns as he mended his tools. He spoke of the new Zion, as if it were already being built. The Lord will bless this union, spouse, he said one evening, stirring the meager squirrel stew. You will be fruitful. You will bear a son, and he will be the first of the pure line. He will be a prophet, like Samuel. Serafina sat in her mother's chair, staring into the fire. She had not spoken a full sentence in days. She had become a doll, an automaton. She cooked, she scrubbed, she mended. And at night, she lay perfectly still on the cot, praying for a death that felt as distant as the flatlands. The congregation, meanwhile, was fracturing. Old Man Sullivan, his Flatlander wife, weeping nightly by their hearth, began to wonder if the law of man had any place this high in the mountains. The Pearsall boys, young and full of hot blood, spoke quietly in the woods of unnatural doings, but they were terrified of the pastor's power. Only Silas Croft, the elder, made the trek to the pastor's cabin. He came as an ambassador of the fearful flock. He knocked, his hat in his hand, the rain dripping from his white beard. Elijah opened the door, his face bright. Brother Silas, come in, come see the blessing of the Lord. Silas stepped inside. The cabin was clean, but the air was suffocating. He saw Serafina by the hearth, stirring a pot. She didn't look up. She looked smaller, diminished, as if she were shrinking. Pastor, Silas began, his voice rough. The folk, they're uneasy. The rain, the crops, they reckon it's a sign of displeasure. Elijah laughed, a short, sharp bark. Displeasure? No, Brother Silas. It is a test. It is the flood, come to wash away the doubt. The Lord is testing us to see if we will hold to his new covenant. And when the sun returns, it will shine only on the faithful. He grabbed Silas by the shoulders, his grip like iron. Tell them, Silas, tell the flock to hold fast. The blessing is coming. I can feel it. The holy seed is being planted. Silas looked past the pastor's wild eyes to the girl by the fire. He saw her knuckles red and raw from scrubbing. He saw the deadness in her eyes. He saw not a blessed spouse, but a broken child. He nodded, unable to meet Elijah's gaze. I'll tell him, Pastor." He fled the cabin, slipping in the mud as he rushed back down the path. He did not tell the congregation what the pastor said. He went to his own cabin, barred the door, and took a long drink from a clay jug of corn liquor, a sin he usually saved for the deepest winter. But this, he reckoned, was the deepest winter his soul had ever known. A month after the consecration, when a hot, sticky summer had settled over the holler, a stranger arrived. This was an event rarer than a blizzard in July. The folk of Lost Creek were clannish, suspicious of anyone who didn't carry their blood or their ways. His name was Caleb Rivers. He was a young man, not yet 20, from the valley towns far below. He was a trapper, following a long, forgotten game trail over the high ridge in search of beaver and fox. He was lean, with sun-bleached hair and clear blue eyes that held none of the fear and superstition of the holler folk. He was the outside world, walking in on worn leather boots. He emerged from the woods near the Sullivans' property, leading a mule laden with traps. Old Man Sullivan met him at the fence line, a long rifle held loosely in his arms. "Keep walking, stranger," Sullivan said, his voice flat. "This here's private land. We don't take to strangers." "Beg pardon, sir," Caleb said, his voice easy, unafraid. "Name's Caleb Rivers. Just following a line. Meanin' no harm. My mule's thrown a shoe, and I'm low on salt. Was hoping to trade some prime pelts for a bit of blacksmithing and supplies." Sullivan looked at the pelts. Fox, mink, beaver. They were well prepared. He looked at the mule's hoof. The shoe was indeed gone, and Sullivan, for all his suspicion, was a practical man. "We got a smithy," Sullivan grumbled, "but we ain't got much, and we don't truck with flatlanders." "I'm no flatlander," Caleb smiled. "I was raised in the foothills. I can pay my way." He unslung a fine brace of rabbits from his pack. "And I reckon I'm a fair hand at smithin' myself, if your man'll let me use the forge." The offer of fresh meat and the polite confidence of the young man softened Sullivan. He was also, deep down, hungry for news of the world beyond the ridge. He lowered the rifle. "Forge is yonder," he grunted, pointing. "You can bed down in the smithy, but you're gone by morning. We ain't a friendly folk right now." Caleb caught the strange note in the man's voice. "Trouble? Nothing that concerns you," Sullivan said quickly, turning away. "See to your mule." Caleb set to work at the small, rusted forge. He was skilled, his hands competent and strong. As he worked the bellows, he watched the life of the hauler from a distance. He saw the women move quickly, never looking up. He saw the men working in silence. The place felt wrong. It was too quiet. There was no laughter, no children playing. It felt like a settlement in mourning. He was hammering the new shoe into shape when he saw her. Serafina had come down to the creek, a heavy wooden bucket in each hand. It was her duty to fetch the water for the pastor's cabin. She moved slowly, her shoulders slumped, her bare feet dragging in the dust. Caleb stopped hammering. He had never seen a creature so utterly desolate. She was beautiful, yes, but it was the beauty of a pressed flower, all color and life drained away, leaving only a fragile, papery form. She knelt by the creek, her movements clumsy, as if her limbs were too heavy. She dipped the first bucket, her thin arms straining to lift it. Caleb wiped the soot from his hands on his trousers and walked toward her. He was halfway there before she noticed him. When she saw him, she didn't just startle. She recoiled, scrambling backward and dropping the bucket, which splashed water all over her dress. She stared at him with the wide, terrified eyes of a deer caught in a snare. "Easy, ma'am," Caleb said softly, holding up his hands. "I ain't gonna hurt you. Just came to help with the water. Those look heavy." Serafina just stared, her mouth open, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He was a stranger, an outsider, a man. In her father's new gospel, all outsiders were serpents, tainted seed sent by the devil. "Please," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. You can't be here. You have to go. Pappy, he'll see you." "Pappy?" Caleb frowned. "Who's your pappy?" "The pastor," she said, gathering her skirts as if to flee. Caleb looked at the girl, at her terror, at the dark circles under her eyes, at the way her dress, too large for her, hung from her frame. He looked back at the silent cabins, at the chapel sitting under the weeping red rock. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and serious, "what kind of place is this?" Before she could answer, a shadow fell across them. "She is in her husband's place, stranger." Elijah Thorne stood on the path 10 feet away. He had approached with the silence of a woods cat. His eyes were not feverish now. They were cold, flat, and full of a deadly possessive certainty. Caleb slowly stood to his full height. He and the pastor were of a size, but where Caleb was lean muscle, Elijah was sharp angles and bone. "Seraphina," Elijah said, his voice calm. "Go back to the cabin, now." Seraphina grabbed her buckets and fled, stumbling in her haste, not daring to look back. Elijah Thorne watched her go before turning his cold gaze back to Caleb. "This is a holy place, son. We don't take to serpents in our garden. I suggest you finish your business and ride out, the way you came." "I'm just a trapper, sir," Caleb said, his hand resting near the skinning knife on his belt. "Just fixin' a shoe." "Then fix it," Elijah said. "The sun is high. Be gone before it sets. The Lord of this holler does not suffer the unclean to linger." The pastor turned and walked back up the path, his black coat disappearing into the shadows of the trees. Caleb stood for a long moment, the sound of the creek suddenly loud in his ears. He had seen fear in the wild, but the terror in that girl's eyes was something different. It was something man-made. And as he walked back to the forge, he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that he would not be leaving before sunset. Caleb finished shoeing the mule, but he made the work last. He drew it out, checking the other hooves, repacking his gear, cleaning his rifle. He was buying time, trying to understand the sickness that gripped this valley. He spoke to Sullivan again, offering to trade for some cornmeal. "You met the pastor then," Sullivan said, not a question. He wouldn't meet Caleb's eye. "I did," Caleb said, keeping his voice neutral. "And his daughter." Sullivan flinched at the word. She ain't just his daughter no more, son. He's consecrated her, took her as his wife, by his own gospel." Caleb's blood ran cold. He had heard tales of isolated communities, of strange beliefs. But this took his own daughter? "He says it's the will of God," Sullivan whispered, looking around nervously, as if the trees themselves were spies for the pastor. "Says the blood's tainted, says he's making a new pure line. He's got a power, stranger, a tongue that can twist the good book till it says black is white. We're God-fearing folk, but we're just folk. We're afeard of him, afeard of his curse." Caleb felt a hot, clean anger rise in him, an emotion that seemed to have no place in this valley of gray fear. "And you all just let him? What's to be done?" Sullivan said, his voice pleading. "There ain't no law up here but the pastor's, and he is the law." Caleb paid for his cornmeal, his face set. He now understood the desolation in the girl's eyes. It was not just fear, it was shame, and it was a prison. He packed his mule, but instead of heading for the ridge he'd come down, he took a small, overgrown path that seemed to lead around the edge of the holler. He was scouting a new trap line, he told Sullivan. In truth, he was looking for an ally, and he suspected the only ally he'd find would be someone as outside the pastor's grip as he was. The path ended at a small, tumble-down cabin set far back in a cove, almost hidden by rhododendron. A thin plume of blue smoke rose from the chimney. This had to be the place. As he approached, an old woman emerged, holding a gnarled staff. It was Widow Maeve. She looked him up and down, her eyes as sharp and black as a crow's. "You're the stranger," she said. It wasn't a question. "Name's Caleb Rivers. I'm just passing through." "Ain't no one just passes through Lost Creek," Maeve said, her voice a dry rustle. "You're running from something, or you're looking for something. In this holler, they end up being the same thing." "I'm looking for sense," Caleb said bluntly. "I just heard what the pastor, what he's done to his girl." The widow's face hardened. "He ain't a pastor. He's a blight, a sickness on the land." He spoke his madness, and the cowards in this valley nodded their heads. They traded that girl's soul for their own peace. "She looks broken," Caleb said. "She is," Maeve spat. He's been her pappy, her mammy, and her God since Martha died. He filled her head with his fire and brimstone, till there warn't no room for her own self. Now he's filled her belly with his seed. Caleb's breath hitched. She's with child. "Aye," the widow said, her voice thick with disgust. "I seen the signs. She's trying to hide it, but I know. She's 2, maybe 3 months along. That's why he's so full of himself. He thinks it's the blessing. Proof his forbidden gospel is the Lord's own truth. He's calling it the holy seed." The anger in Caleb surged, so hot he felt dizzy. He gripped his rifle. Someone's got to stop him. Someone's got to get her out of there. Widow Maeve held up a hand, her dark eyes pinning him. "Hold on, Flatlander. You think you can walk up there with your gun and play the hero? You ain't just fighting a man. You're fighting an idea. You're fighting God, or what they think is God. Elijah Thorne ain't just mad. He's smart. He's got 'em all trapped in their own fear." "So what?" Caleb demanded. "We just let it happen? Let him keep her? Raise that child? You go up there now. You're dead," Maeve said simply. "He'll name you a demon, a tempter. And Silas Croft, that old fool, he'll back the pastor, the Sullivans and Pearsalls. They'll be too scared to help. They'll call it God's judgment, and they'll help Elijah string you from a tree. And what happens to the girl then? He'll just break her worse." Caleb paced, kicking at the hard-packed dirt. "Then what? What can be done?" "Nothing. Yet," the widow said. "He's flying high on his revelation. But that kind of power, it always burns itself out. It always rots from the inside. Right now, she still believes him. Or at least, she's too scared to stop believing him. The moment that changes, that's when you can act. And how do I know when that is?" Widow Maeve looked up at the sky. "The holler will tell you. But I'll tell you this, Caleb Rivers. You stay in these woods. You set your trap line. You watch. But you stay hidden. 'Cause he's seen you. And he knows you ain't one of his flock. He's gonna be watching for you too." She turned and went back inside her cabin, shutting the door. Caleb was left alone with the buzzing of the insects and the terrible knowledge he now carried. He was no longer just a trapper. He was a witness. Summer deepened. The heat in the holler was oppressive, a wet, heavy blanket that smothered all sound. For Serafina, the world had shrunk to the 4 walls of the cabin, the path to the creek, and the growing, undeniable change within her own body. Widow Maeve was right. She was pregnant. At first, she had tried to deny it, attributing the sickness in the mornings to the heat or to bad pork. But as the weeks passed, the truth became unavoidable. Her body, the last thing she'd felt was her own, was now betraying her, bearing the fruit of her father's covenant. Elijah was ecstatic. He saw it as the ultimate vindication. His gospel was true. The Lord had blessed their union with impossible speed. "It is the holy seed," he proclaimed, kneeling before her, his hands hovering over her stomach, not quite touching. "It is the prophet, the first of the pure. O Seraphina's spouse, you are blessed among women." His joy was a grotesque mirror to her horror. She felt no connection to the life inside her. It felt other, a parasite, a physical manifestation of her father's madness and her own profound sin. For in the deep, silent chambers of her heart, the ones her father's words hadn't yet destroyed, she knew this was a sin. The good book, the one her mother had read to her, the one about a gentle Jesus, not a wrathful, demanding God, spoke of abomination. She was an abomination, and she was carrying one. This secret knowledge began to build a new wall inside her. It was a wall of self-loathing, but it was also, for the first time, a wall against him. When he read to her now, his voice full of triumph, she did not hear the words. She heard only the sound, a droning noise that she could hide behind. She grew thinner, her face gaunt, all the life she had draining into the thing she was growing. Her pale, translucent skin made her look like a phantom, haunted by the life inside her. Elijah, blinded by his own narrative, saw her physical decline as spiritual purification. "The Lord is refining you, spouse," he'd say, "burning away the worldly flesh to make you a purer vessel for the Holy Child." He began to preach with renewed vigor. The congregation, seeing Seraphina's obvious state, was trapped. The proof was right there. How could they deny the pastor when the evidence of the blessing was growing in his own daughter-wife? They sank deeper into their terrified obedience. Silas Croft began to preach alongside Elijah, his own voice shaky, speaking of the miracle in their midst, the new Zion soon to be born. Seraphina's only escape was the walk to the creek. It was the one chore that took her out of the cabin. She would linger there, the buckets heavy at her feet, staring into the cool, moving water. She would watch the water skimmers dart across the surface and envy their simple, thoughtless freedom. It was there, one hazy afternoon, that she saw him again. Caleb Rivers had been true to the widow's word. He had vanished. He'd set a cold camp high on the ridge, living off his traps, watching the holler from above. He was patient. He'd seen Elijah stalking the woods near his old camp, looking for him, and knew the pastor was paranoid. But today, he'd risked coming down, needing to see her. He stayed hidden 50 yards away in a thicket of laurel. He saw her come to the creek. He saw her stand, staring, her hand resting on her stomach. He saw the way her body had changed. He saw her drop to her knees. Her shoulders began to shake. At first, he thought she was ill. Then he heard the sound, a raw, choked noise, torn from her throat. She was weeping. It was not the gentle weeping of sadness. It was the dry, agonizing retching of a soul in absolute despair. She rocked back and forth, her hands pulling at her own hair, her mouth open in a silent scream. Caleb watched, his heart breaking. This was not the obedient, brainwashed girl the widow had described. This was a prisoner. This was the moment Maeve had spoken of. The belief was cracking. He stepped out of the laurel. Seraphina's head snapped up. Her eyes were red, wild. When she saw him, she scrambled back, pure terror on her face. "No, go, he'll kill you. He'll kill us both." "I ain't going anywhere," Caleb said, his voice low and steady, advancing slowly, as one would approach a terrified animal. "Not without you." You don't understand," she sobbed, clutching her stomach. It's done. I'm unclean. I'm carrying the sin." The word sin was a revelation. She had said it. Not blessing, not holy seed. Sin. "That ain't your sin, Seraphina," Caleb said, kneeling a few feet from her. "It's his. What he did to you, what he's doing to you, that ain't God's way. You know it or you wouldn't be crying. He's the pastor," she whispered, the words of her indoctrination fighting back. "He's God's voice, the forbidden gospel." "There ain't no forbidden gospel," Caleb said, his voice hard. "There's just the good book, and it says what he's doing is wrong. Plain and simple. He's a man, Seraphina, a sick, twisted man who's using his power to hurt you. He ain't God. He's just a man." She looked at him, her eyes searching his. He was the first person in her entire life to speak a truth that echoed her own terrified, buried doubts. He was the first person to call her father a man and not a prophet. He'll hunt me," she whispered. "He'll drag me back. He'll hurt." She couldn't say it. "He'll have to get through me first," Caleb said. "There's a world outside this holler, Seraphina. A world with laws, a world where men don't do this." "I can get you out. I have a mule. We can be over the ridge by sunup." She stared at him, torn. The world outside, Sodom, the flatlands, the place of sinners. But this was hell. I can't," she stammered, shaking her head. Not now. He's watching. He's always watching." "When?" Caleb pressed. "Give me a sign. When can I come for you?" The birth," she whispered, her eyes wide with a new, desperate idea. "When the child comes, Widow Maeve, he'll have to let her in. He's too proud to be a midwife. When she's there, that's the only time he won't be. "All right," Caleb said, nodding. "When the time comes, you find a way to let Maeve know. I'll be watching her cabin. When I see her move, I'll come. I swear it, Seraphina. I ain't leaving you here." He backed away, melting back into the woods. Seraphina stayed by the creek. Her weeping stopped. The despair was still there, but it now had a companion. A tiny, fragile, impossibly dangerous spark of hope. Elijah Thorne was not a fool. He was a zealot, but his zealotry had sharpened his senses. He ruled the holler not just through fear of God, but through a keen understanding of the human heart. He knew that the trapper, Caleb Rivers, had not left. He'd seen the signs, a footprint near the ridgeline that didn't belong to any of his flock, a trap set for a mink that was not one of his own crude snares. The stranger was still in his woods, a serpent, just as he'd said. And Elijah knew with the prophet's certainty what the serpent wanted. It wanted his ewe lamb. It wanted Seraphina. This knowledge filled him with a righteous, incandescent rage. The devil was testing him. The devil had sent a handsome, smooth-talking flatlander to tempt the mother of the new Zion. He began to watch Seraphina with a new, suffocating intensity. He forbade her from going to the creek alone, ordering one of the Pearsall boys to fetch their water. He kept her inside the cabin, claiming the sun was bad for her delicate condition. The prison walls were closing in. Seraphina, meanwhile, clung to the hope Caleb had given her. She began to plan a new and foreign process for her. She had to survive until the birth. She became, outwardly, the perfect, obedient wife. She stopped weeping. She quoted the scriptures he fed her. She spoke of the holy seed with a flat, dull voice that he mistook for pious reverence. "You see, spouse," Elijah said, pleased, "the Lord has settled your spirit. You accept his grace." "Yes, Pappy," she'd say, using the old name, which both pleased and unsettled him. "I accept it." But her compliance was a mask, and Elijah, for all his cunning, was blinded by his own ego. He wanted to believe she was converted, that his gospel was triumphant. The serpent, however, remained. Elijah started carrying his long rifle with him everywhere, even to the pulpit. He preached fiery sermons about tempters, about the sins of the flesh, about the unclean beasts that prowl the borders of the faithful. His eyes would scan the woods through the chapel's open door as he preached. Caleb, high on the ridge, knew he'd been spotted. He knew the pastor was hunting him. The game had changed. It was no longer a rescue. It was a war, and the holler was the battlefield. He moved his camp every night. He was a ghost, a rumor in the woods. This only infuriated Elijah more. The pastor began to turn his paranoia on his flock. "He's been seen," he roared at his congregation one Sunday. "The tempter, the son of Belial, and he's had help. Who among you has given him water? Who has traded him meal?" He stared at old man Sullivan, whose face went pale. "He who harbors the serpent is bitten by the serpent," Elijah bellowed. "His taint is on you. You must purge it." He convinced two of the Pearsall boys, young, impressionable, and terrified of the pastor's wrath, to be his guardians of the covenant. He armed them with their father's old muskets and set them to patrol the holler. They were clumsy, frightened boys playing at being soldiers, but they were eyes and ears for Elijah. The holler had become an armed camp. Neighbors eyed each other, suspicious. The fragile community was tearing itself apart. Caleb knew he couldn't wait for the birth. The situation was too unstable. The pastor was losing his grip, and a desperate man was a dangerous one. He had to force the issue. He went to see Widow Maeve. "He's hunting me," Caleb told her, slipping into her cabin at dusk. "I know," she said, grinding herbs. "He's wound tighter than a spring trap. He's gonna snap. I need to get her out. Now. Tonight." "And how do you plan to do that?" Maeve asked. "The Pearsall boys are watching the cabin, and Elijah sleeps with his rifle. I need a diversion," Caleb said, his eyes hard. "Something big, something that will pull him, and everyone, away from that cabin. Something that looks like judgment." Maeve stopped grinding. She looked at him, a slow, grim understanding dawning on her face. "Judgment," she mused. "He's been preaching fire and cleansing," Caleb said. "He's terrified 'em all with it." The widow looked at the dry woods, at the old empty cabin of the Miller family, who had died out years before. It was on the other side of the holler. "Fire," she whispered. "Aye, that'll bring 'em running. Even him. He can't let his holler burn down." "I need you to get a message to Seraphina," Caleb said. Tell her to be ready. When she hears the bell." "The bell?" "The chapel bell. When they see the fire, they'll ring the warning bell. That's the signal. When the bell rings, she needs to run. Run for the creek and then follow it upstream into the high woods. I'll find her there." "And you?" Maeve asked. "I'll be setting the fire," Caleb said, his face grim. "He wants his cleansing? I'll give him one." The night was moonless, thick, and suffocatingly still. The holler was asleep, locked behind its barred doors. Caleb moved like smoke, his moccasins silent on the pine needle-strewn path. He carried a small pouch of tinder and a burning coal from Maeve's hearth, sheltered in a clay pot. Widow Maeve had done her part. Feigning a need for sassafras root, she had gone to the edge of the pastor's property and, accidentally, run into Serafina, who was permitted to be outside for a few moments in the evening air. While Elijah watched from the porch, Maeve had pressed a small bundle of herbs into the girl's hand. "For the burthen," she'd said loudly. And then, in a whisper that was covered by a cough, "The fire, the bell, run to the creek, run high." Serafina's hand had closed on the herbs, her eyes widening. She'd given a single, sharp nod. Now Caleb stood before the Miller cabin. It was derelict, dry as bone, the chinking fallen out, the roof half collapsed. It was perfect. It was far enough from the other cabins to be safe, but close enough that the flames would be seen by everyone. He laid the tinder inside, against the driest wall. He blew on the coal, and the tinder caught, fragile at first, then growing stronger. He added dry leaves, then twigs. The flames licked up the wall, tasting the old, dry wood. Within a minute, the entire cabin was a roaring torch, a sudden, violent orange flower blooming in the dark. Caleb didn't wait. He melted back into the woods, circling wide, heading for the high creek. Back in the holler, the first shout came from Silas Croft. "Fire! Fire on the ridge! The Miller place is burning!" A moment later, the frantic, terrifying sound of the warning bell shattered the night. In the pastor's cabin, Elijah Thorne sprang from his bed. He grabbed his rifle. "The fire!" he hissed. "It's the judgment, the cleansing. It has begun." Serafina, who had not slept, was already on her feet. Her heart was a trapped bird against her ribs. "Stay here," Elijah commanded her. "Bar the door. It is the Lord's work. I must go and see." He was ecstatic, his eyes wild. He truly believed his prophecy was coming true, that the fire of God was descending. He ran from the cabin, shouting for his guardians. "Silas, Pearsall's, to me, we must witness the covenant of fire." The Pearsall boys, who had been patrolling by sleeping near the smokehouse, jumped up, grabbing their muskets, and followed the pastor as he ran toward the blaze. The entire holler was awake, doors slamming, people shouting, all of them running toward the fire. This was her chance. Serafina did not hesitate. She did not bar the door. She grabbed the small, sharp knife she used for skinning vegetables. She took nothing else. Not her mother's shawl, not an extra pair of shoes. She ran out of the cabin, barefoot and pregnant, into the darkness. She did not run toward the fire. She ran away from it, away from the shouts, away from the light. She scrambled down the path to the creek, her breath tearing at her lungs. The baby, a heavy weight, made her clumsy. She slipped on the wet rocks, the icy water of the creek soaking her dress. But she didn't care. She plunged into the water, following it upstream, away from the holler. The cold was a shock, but it was a clean shock. It was the first clean thing she had felt in months. "Run high," Maeve had said. She pushed her way through the thick rhododendron that lined the banks, her hands and face scratched, her feet cut and bruised on the rocky creek bed. Behind her, the holler was a bed of chaos, the bell ringing, the men shouting, the orange glow of the fire painting the sky. She was running. She was finally running. Caleb waited in the high woods, his rifle ready. The glow of the fire was bright below him, the sound of the bell frantic. He strained his ears, listening for the sound of someone coming up the creek. He heard a splash, a stumble, a sobbed breath. "Serafina?" he called low. "Here!" she gasped, collapsing out of the thicket. She was soaked, shivering, bleeding from a dozen small cuts, but she was there. Caleb grabbed her, pulling her up the bank. "You're safe. You're safe. We gotta move. They'll figure it out soon." He half-carried her, pushing through the woods, heading for the high ridge where his mule was tethered. They had a precious few minutes. But Elijah Thorne's madness had not eclipsed his cunning. He reached the Miller cabin and saw, instantly, that this was no judgment from God. The fire had been set, deliberately, from the inside. This was an earthly fire, a diversion. "The serpent!" he roared, his realization striking him like a physical blow. He didn't even look at the fire again. He spun around, his face a mask of fury. "He's taken her! Back to the cabin! Find her!" He ran back, his long legs eating up the ground, Silas Croft and the Pearsall boys trailing behind him. He burst into his own cabin. It was empty. The door was open. The knife was gone from the table. "He's got her!" Elijah screamed, his voice cracking with a rage that was no longer righteous, but purely demonic. "Find them! Spread out! They're heading for the ridge. They can't escape." The Pearsall boys, terrified of this new, unhinged pastor, plunged into the woods. Silas Croft hesitated. "Pastor, it's dark. Maybe we should wait for light." "Now!" Elijah bellowed. "Find the serpent and the unclean woman. Find them." Caleb and Seraphina were moving fast, but Seraphina was in no condition to climb. She was flagging, her breath coming in ragged sobs. I can't, Caleb," she wept, stumbling. "I'm too slow." "Yes, you can," he said, pulling her arm over his shoulder. "We're almost there, just a little further." A shout from below. "There! Yonder! On the path!" One of the Pearsall boys had spotted them. A musket flashed in the dark, the shot whistling harmlessly through the trees. "Run!" Caleb yelled. He shoved Seraphina ahead of him and turned, raising his rifle. He fired into the darkness, not to hit, but to slow them down. "He's armed!" the Pearsall boy yelled, diving for cover. But Elijah Thorne was not afraid. He burst through the trees, his eyes meeting Caleb's in the gloom. He raised his own rifle. "Demon!" he shrieked. "Give her back to me!" He fired. Caleb felt a searing pain like a hot poker slam into his shoulder. He staggered, dropping his rifle. The world tilted. "Caleb!" Seraphina screamed, running back to him. "No, run!" he yelled, but it was too late. Elijah was on him. He brought the butt of his rifle down on Caleb's head. Caleb saw a flash of white and then nothing. He awoke to pain. His head was throbbing, his shoulder on fire. He was on a dirt floor. The smell of salt and hickory smoke filled his nose. He was in the chapel smokehouse. His hands were bound tightly behind him. The door opened, letting in a sliver of gray dawn. Pastor Elijah Thorne stood silhouetted, his gaunt frame filling the doorway. "The serpent is caught," the pastor said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "And the woman is returned to her place." "Seraphina," Caleb groaned, tasting blood. "Where is she?" "She is in my cabin," Elijah said, "where she is being chastened for her sin, for listening to you." Caleb pulled at his ropes. "You're a monster. Let her go." "I am her husband," Elijah said, stepping inside. "And you? You are the tempter. The congregation is gathering. They will see what the Lord does to those who would destroy the new Zion. You will have a trial, son, and then you will be the sacrifice." The holler was awake. The fire on the ridge had burned itself out, leaving a smoking ruin. The failed escape had left a new, more terrible tension in the air. The flock gathered at the chapel, not for prayer, but for a trial. Elijah Thorne had dragged Seraphina back to the cabin. He had locked her in the small root cellar, the heavy door bolted from the outside. She was in the cold darkness, alone with her terror and the child inside her. Now Elijah stood before his pulpit, his face pale and strained, but his eyes burning with a feverish light. He had Caleb dragged from the smokehouse and thrown to the floor at the front of the chapel. Caleb was weak from blood loss, his shoulder a mess, his head throbbing. "Behold!" Elijah roared, pointing at Caleb. "The serpent, the devil from the flatlands, sent to poison our flock and steal our holy vessel." The congregation, the Sullivans, the Crofts, the Pearsalls, stared, their faces a mixture of fear and a dark, morbid curiosity. "He came among us," Elijah preached, pacing, "and sowed dissent. He whispered lies to the chosen mother, the spouse of the covenant. He set the Lord's fire as a diversion to steal her away, to take the holy seed into the unclean world." "He's lying," Caleb spat from the floor. "He's the one. He took his own daughter. He forced her. That ain't holy. It's a sin, and you all know it." "Silence!" Elijah shrieked. He speaks with the devil's tongue." He turned to the crowd. "The Lord's law is clear. A tempter, a false prophet. What is the judgment?" He looked directly at Silas Croft. Silas, the elder, stood. His face was gray. He had seen the madness in the pastor's eyes. He had seen Seraphina's empty, broken face. But the fear was too deep. The good book says, "A false prophet shall be put to death," Silas stammered, the words tasting like ash. "Aye!" Elijah cried, triumphant. "Put to death. We will purge the taint. We will hang him from the high oak as a warning to the world below. Lost Creek is the Lord's, and he protects his own." A rope was produced. The Pearsall boys, their faces white, hauled Caleb to his feet. They began to drag him toward the door, toward the large oak tree in the chapel yard. Caleb struggled, but he was one against many, and weak. "You're cowards," he yelled at the crowd. "All of you. You're letting him do this. You're letting him destroy that girl. You're all damned not by God, but by this man." His words hit home. Old Man Sullivan looked away. His wife began to weep quietly, but no one moved to help. They were paralyzed. They dragged him out into the gray morning light and slung the rope over a thick branch. They stood him on a barrel. Elijah Thorne himself took the noose and slipped it over Caleb's head, pulling it tight. "You have come into the Lord's garden," Elijah hissed, his face inches from Caleb's, "and now you will be cast out down into the pit." He turned to the crowd, his arms raised. "Let this be the sealing of our new Zion. Let this blood purge our sin of doubt. No." The shriek cut through the air. It was a sound of pure, primal rage. Seraphina stood on the chapel steps. She was no longer the pale, ghostly lily. She was a fury. She was covered in mud and filth from the root cellar, her hair a wild tangle, her mother's dress torn. In her hand she held the heavy, leather-bound family Bible. She had found a loose stone in the cellar wall. Fueled by an adrenaline she'd never known, she had worked it free, used it to smash the rotting wood of the bolt bar until it splintered. She had crawled out just as they were dragging Caleb to the tree. "No!" she screamed again, and the entire congregation turned to stone. Elijah Thorne's face went white. "Spouse, go back. You are unclean. You are not. I am not your spouse." Seraphina shrieked, her voice raw. She stalked forward, her eyes locked on his. All her fear, all her indoctrination, all her silent suffering had been burned away, leaving only a cold, hard rage. "You are not a prophet," she yelled, pointing at him. "You are a liar and a beast." The crowd gasped. To speak so to the pastor, it was unthinkable. "The devil has you, child," Elijah stammered, taking a step back. "Your mind is poisoned by the serpent." "My mind is clear," she cried. "My mind is clear for the first time. You told me it was the Lord's will." She held up the Bible. "I've been reading this book my whole life, Pappy, and it says you are an abomination. It says you have sinned against me and against God." She threw the heavy Bible. It struck him square in the chest, and he stumbled back, the sheer shock of the act staggering him more than the weight. The good book, his weapon, used against him by his own daughter. "She's right," a voice said. Everyone turned. It was Old Man Sullivan. His wife was clutching his arm, but he stepped forward. "She's right," he said again, his voice shaking but firm. This ain't God's way. We've been afeard. We've been cowards. But this is wrong. Treason." Silas Croft whispered, but his voice had no conviction. "He ain't God," Seraphina yelled, pointing now at Silas. "And he ain't God," pointing at Sullivan. "And he," she spat, pointing at her father, "is just a man, a wicked, cruel man. And I won't let you hurt anyone else." The dam of fear had broken. The congregation was murmuring, their faces changing from terror to a slow, dawning, collective shame. They had been led by a madman, and it had taken the madman's broken victim to show them. "The covenant is broken," Elijah roared, desperation in his voice. "The fire is coming for you all. You are all damned." "Then we'll be damned together," a new voice said. Widow Maeve had come down from the ridge, standing at the edge of the crowd. "But we won't be damned by you, Elijah." Elijah Thorne looked around. His flock was no longer his. Their eyes were not full of fear. They were full of judgment. He had lost them. In that moment of chaos, as all eyes were on the confrontation, Serafina ran to the barrel. She used the skinning knife she still had to saw at the ropes binding Caleb's hands. "Get him down," she grunted. The Pearsall boys, their faces slack with confusion, just stared. "Help him, you fools!" Widow Maeve shouted. One of the boys, as if waking from a dream, jumped up and helped Serafina cut the noose from Caleb's neck. Caleb collapsed off the barrel, his wounded shoulder giving way. "Seize him!" Elijah shrieked, pointing at Caleb. "Seize the serpent!" But no one moved. They just watched him. Elijah Thorne, the prophet of the Bleeding Rock, the voice of the forbidden gospel, was alone. He looked at Serafina, who was helping Caleb to his feet, her face set against him. He looked at his congregation, who were now just a mob of silent, accusing neighbors. With a high-pitched wail that was part animal, part madman, he turned and fled. He ran not to his cabin, but up the path toward the chapel, past the pulpit, and scrambled up the cliffs of the Bleeding Rock, his prophecies of fire and brimstone echoing behind him. The holler was silent, save for the sound of Pastor Thorne's distant, mad raving from the cliffs above. Serafina stood with Caleb, his good arm around her, holding him up. The congregation stared at them, then at each other, as if waking from a long, collective nightmare. What do we do now?" Old Man Sullivan asked, his voice trembling. The law had returned to Lost Creek, and it had no leader. "First," Widow Maeve said, pushing through the crowd, "we tend to this man." She looked at Caleb's shoulder. "That ball's still in there, and he's got a fever coming on." They carried him, not to the pastor's cabin, but to the Sullivans. Mrs. Sullivan, weeping with a relief she couldn't explain, tore up her best linens for bandages. Widow Maeve, with her herbs and a sharp knife, dug the ball out while Caleb sweated and groaned. Serafina holding his hand, her knuckles white, her face a mask of grim determination. She did not leave his side. For 3 days she sat by the cot, bathing his head, forcing water and broth between his lips, and watching the woods, terrified her father would return. But Elijah Thorne did not return. On the 4th day, a Pearsall boy, scouting for game, found him. The pastor was at the bottom of a ravine, a good 100 feet below the highest peak of the Bleeding Rock. He had either fallen, or, in his madness, he had finally met the God he was so eager to speak for. They buried him in the frozen ground behind the chapel, next to the wife he had murdered with prayer. Silas Croft said a few words, his voice hollow, quoting from a book he no longer seemed to understand. After the funeral, Serafina stood with Caleb by his mule. He was weak, his arm in a sling, but he could ride. The Holler folk had given them supplies, salted pork, cornmeal, a thick blanket. It was a silent apology, a penance. "You'll come with me," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. Serafina looked back at the Holler, the mist-shrouded prison of her entire life. It was all she had ever known. There's nothing for me here," she whispered. "There's a whole world out there," Caleb said gently, touching her face. "It ain't all good, but it's just folks. And the law is the law. You'll be safe." She looked down at her own swollen belly. "And this?" she asked, her voice full of shame. Caleb put his hand over hers. "It ain't the child's fault. It's just a baby. And it's yours. We'll figure it out. Together." She took his hand. For the first time, she looked at the ridge not as a wall, but as a doorway. She mounted the mule, and Caleb walked beside her, his good hand on the harness. As they started the long, slow climb out of Lost Creek Hollow, Serafina did not look back. She kept her eyes fixed on the patch of blue sky visible above the trees, a color she felt she was seeing for the very first time. Behind them, the chapel of the Bleeding Rock sat silent, its terrible gospel finally and forever broken.